Hey there, it's Jeremy from the Frame Mind podcast. Today we're sitting down with Nubia Duvall Wilson. She's the author of The Survivors Club, and she's also the founder of Cielo Consulting based in South Orange, New Jersey. She talks to us about her own mental health journey and her own advocacy she found through survivorship. Stay tuned.
Are you listening? Damn. Yeah.
Alrighty, thank you guys for joining. I'm Jeremy, the founder of Mind Above, the mental health practice based in Dallas, Texas, and this is the Frame Mind podcast. And in this podcast, what we try to do is talk to people that have a perspective that they share on their journey in mental health, as well as just some great life advice, and also learn about what they do, their background, their field, and what drives them to continue to pursue greatness. So it's cool today. I've got a friend of mine that I became friends with over the power of networking, and her name's Nubia, and she is based in New Jersey. And I'll let her introduce herself as well and tell you more about her.
Thanks for having me on, Jeremy. So yes, I'm Nubia Duvall Wilson. I wear a lot of different hats. First and foremost, I like to share that I am a survivor of child sexual abuse, and as someone who's a content creator, avid writer, I use my voice and use my writing to create content that empowers and ignites action in others to understand what mental health, what it's about, what it's like to be surviving after any type of trauma. As an adult, as a mother, as a business woman, I have my own business, and just everyday life, what it's like to live with PTSD and living with trauma. And I'm also a business owner. I own Cielo Consulting, which is a public relations and marketing firm in South Orange, and we focus on the lifestyle space. And as I said, I'm a mom and a wife, and if I add one more hat, I don't know if I'll be able to handle it. So we'll keep it at that for now.
Okay, yeah. Well, I think what's awesome is, like, first off, that without skipping a beat, you introduce yourself and you address the being a victim of child sexual trauma. I think, the strength that you have to share that and to use your own experience to help benefit others is very positive and rewarding. And, me, of course, I'm going to be the crunchy therapist. It's all about, mental health and addressing things and helping them, build our strengths to do even more in our daily lives. So I appreciate you, your powerful voice and your advocacy, especially, like, for instance, to being able to write such a great book, as well as do the things you do, because I know that you do stuff to support charities and organizations that help support children as well. Can you tell us more about that?
Yeah, sure. So I published a book called The Survivors Club. I should be holding it next to me. I think it's behind me. I won't worry about that now. But anyway, it's a novella, so it's a quick read. I published this novella a year after I started to remember my abuse. So I had really done a good job, as Jeremy's probably used to hearing, of repressing those memories of my abuse. And so once they started to come up while raising my children, I started to just go back and look at my writing. I mean, I've always written poetry. I've always written short stories. Many of my short stories were inspired by my dreams, really, really vivid dreams since I was a child. And so when I went back to this one short story, I realized that it was trying to tell me something. It was trying to tell me, you've had an inappropriate relationship with a relative, And so at the time I was like, okay, this was 2016 in the summer. I said, I'm not ready to, work on this project now, but there's a reason why, I went back and found this short story, and I'm going to go back, expand it, and put it out there. And so that's what I did. In 2017, I started working on it and I put it out, and it's a supernatural thriller. So it's a story that anyone could pick up if you're into supernatural, if you're into mysteries, could pick it up and read it and get something out of it. I purposely didn't make the book something that would be too triggering for those who are survivors. But first and foremost, I wrote the book for survivors of abuse to remind them that This can be a lonely road, but you don't have to do it alone. It's the power of the community that will help you during your healing process. And I use the book as a vehicle to have these discussions and normalize the conversation around survivorship and mental health. And I do give back to charity when it's purchased. It helps. New York Center for Children, which provides free therapy services to children from the age of 3 to up into their early 20s, and Stop Child Predators as well, which does a lot of advocacy lobbying work in the government in DC. So yeah, I don't even take anything from this book when it's sold. I give it all back, and that's what I think it's all about: is how to give back to the community through this.
So I know I'm going to fanboy because I think that's awesome that you do all that, and then that you're able to use your voice not only to bring awareness and help others find their voice to deal with a difficult road in a difficult time. Because a lot of times, with sexual assault as a child, and even into adulthood, it can be very tough to completely fathom the effectiveness of it. And then also, it's the suppression of it over time and having to find a way to get through. So being able to utilize that, bring it to a palatable explanation and journey in the book form, I think is fantastic. And then also too, you turn around and you don't just stop there and share a story. You use it to benefit others so that they can do the most good. So, them being able to take that and then provide services to kids who may be experiencing trauma or in need themselves. That's fantastic.
Thank you.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So you mentioned something about community, and I kind of want to key in on that. So if you had to talk about in your experiences, who's someone, be persons, a thing that's been the most influential in development into who you are today?
So that's a really interesting question, and the answer is my abuser, which I think people would be surprised to hear. But when I tell people when the moment is right, and I don't just go up to random people and go, hey, I'm a survivor, but when the moment's right and it's the right platform, I talk about this, and I say, if someone asked me if I could go back and change what happened and that I wouldn't have been abused as a child, would I do that? And I said no. This happened for a reason, and I believe that my abuser did this because he wanted to tarnish me. He wanted to make me something that wasn't good, right? Do something to hurt me long term. And so what happened was the opposite. I became a very tenacious, strong person, sometimes to a fault. I've learned to also be more vulnerable. But yeah, if it weren't for those things that happened, as terrible as they were, I wouldn't be who I am today. So yeah, I mean, and in the short term, I would have to say, my mom. It's not an easy relationship that we have because the abuser is a relative, but I will say that my mother gave me the gift of writing. And in this novella, I thank her for that. When I was 5 or 6 years old, she taught me how to write poetry. Kids are playing Barbie dolls. I'm learning how to, do similes and metaphors. And so, of course, I did play with Barbie dolls too. But yeah, so I thank her all the time for putting the pencil in my hand. And that's what I use over the years to help me heal.
Okay. So something you bring up is the fact that, the abuser is someone that has influenced you to become who you are today. So would you say maybe the response to remembering and to the trauma was kind of an integral part, the healing journey, as I kind of call it when I talk to people?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I guess in some ways I should also thank the person who decided to marry me and have children with me, because the children were the trigger. I, but before that, I already knew that I had anxiety. I had gone to a therapist years before I had started to remember because I wanted to understand. I was like, why am I such an anxious person? And it was really my daughter's birth, being on maternity leave, which was really difficult. And saying to myself, you're an overachiever. You know, when you go back to work, you're going to want to succeed and you're going to be even more anxious than before. So you should probably see a therapist. And like, no one really gave me that advice. I just gave it to myself. And so I started to see a therapist during my maternity leave and kept it up for a while. And then I had gone on hiatus the following year. But anyway, that was in 2013. So I mean, you know, like there's just so many different little events that helped to bring me to where I was in the summer of 2016. And I wasn't currently seeing my therapist. And so, you know, I sent her an email and I was like, we got some things to talk about. She was like, no,
We're receiving into that.
So, yeah.
Okay. So that brings up, you know, something to think about too. Like you said, is, you know, that you did go seek mental health, but the initial, you know, draw to it was kind of addressing the anxiety symptoms. And, you know, that's something that can absolutely occur is we don't even realize it, but we have this subconscious, you know, unspoken bias in us to still suppress and withhold. And our mind is so powerful that we'll have this burden and this weight we carry, but we're so used to it that we frame the problems that exist because of it as our focus areas. So our anxiety occurs. I don't know why I get so anxious. I don't know why I get so nervous in these situations. And then sometimes, like when it comes back to trauma memory, you know, is a lasting bond. So you being able to connect that further. And it's interesting that you really, you know, you share that, hey, your mental health journey, you started there and, it discontinued and then it picked back up. And I think that's something important too, is because sometimes people that are first going into mental health and, you know, that journey and that experience, it feels intimidating because you think it's going to be like a movie and it's going to play out like something on TV, which oftentimes it doesn't. And B, also too, it could be a little stinging, but that stinging is bringing us a way to, you know, open up to vulnerability and express truth. And that truth is not just for the therapist to understand us, it's for ourselves to be understood by actually listening to what's really going on.
Yeah, it's true. It's interesting. When I went on the break, I knew that I really needed to continue, and she did too. She kind of gave me this look like, "You sure you need the break?" You know, and I was like, "Yeah, I'm fine." And one of the reasons why was that I was starting a new job, and I was back in my tunnel vision. I need to control everything. I want to like do my best at this new job and just focus on that. I don't want to be taken away and have to go to therapy, you know, for an hour and have to then go back in the office. I mean, granted, I was able to work from home mostly, which was awesome because I had become pregnant again. So that actually was triggering I mean, it's hard for people to understand someone's timeline, but basically I had my daughter in July of 2013. I went back to work in New York City in a PR agency. Great company, by the way. And in February of 2014, I got pregnant again. My daughter was 6 months. And I was like, oh, and I'm such a control freak. Having an unplanned pregnancy was like triggering for me. And I didn't understand why, other than the fact that I knew that I was always a control freak. So, you know, my husband and I wanted 2 kids. I just wanted it to be, you know, let's start after the summer, after I have my rosé every evening and, you know, all of that. And it didn't happen that way. So long story short, you know, I got a new job and was able to quit my agency job. Like the stars were aligned. I was able to mostly work from home. And so I had taken that break and really focused, you know, my coping mechanism is overachieving and diving into work, diving into a project to make myself feel like I have control and that I'm doing something that's where I can see the results, right? The fruits of my labor. And so it wasn't until I think near the end of I think actually what's ironic is There was a couple of times when maybe we tried doing therapy just virtual, and back then that's like taboo. What, you only want to do virtual? This is
Yeah.
2013. Who does that? And now it's just that's just the way it is. I tell my therapist, I'm like, we were ahead of the time.
Pioneers.
But anyway, so yeah. Long story long, I fought it a lot in the beginning, and even to the extent of just wanting to do virtual and then just saying I need a break. And so I'm really blessed and lucky that my therapist still had room on her plate, and that I had the wherewithal to when the memory started coming back, say, okay, the first thing I did was I emailed her, and I almost
Yeah,
felt triumphant, like I figured something out.
absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Well, it's that it's that awkward triumph.
Yeah.
It's like, hey, I'm going to, look into something that's been so distressing that I somehow found a way to put a block between it, and it always hasn't been perfect. It's kind of like, we made the wall, but we made it out of fiber mesh, and so things are going to seep
Right.
through. And they come through at times that we don't want, and we start trying to put some extra layers on, and eventually it just keeps seeping through. But when we finally address it, it's much more manageable, and we see that on that journey for healing, yeah, we can have great accomplishment and achievement because we speak to our pain and we actually allow it to be, and we acknowledge it instead of avoid it. And then moving forward, it doesn't get to occupy so much space. So I think that's beautiful.
Well said. Yes. Thank you.
Absolutely. So, with what you do now, talk to me about what it's like in the work world, for you. Like, how do you maintain success? What are some of the changes that you've had to experience recently? So, it's been since roughly beginning middle of March when COVID really hit the United States, and you were in an area that is it was initially heavily saturated by it as it continued to spread. So how did that affect you? How did you, what moves did you have to make to stay as best you could and
Yeah,
everything?
it's a great question. So as I said, my company is called Cielo Consulting. I started it in 2015, September 2015. So it'll be coming up on 5 years in a few weeks. And so really worked hard to build this company. For an entrepreneur, um, March was really scary because in some ways you're like, well, I felt like I've had so much control for so long on my company's
Mhm.
destiny and making decisions and continuing to grow, and then and being okay with the fact that, hey, I'm controlling my salary. I'm not my I'm not working at an agency under other people anymore. But March was scary because I lost half my business, which of course, I mean, I have all time. I have restaurant clients. I had personal fitness studio. Places that were not essential, that had to close, and so authors whose books had been pushed out indefinitely. So it was scary. And then, of course, I have a family. I have two kids that needed to be homeschooled. And no one really knew what that was going to look like and how to navigate it. And we told our caregiver, who was watching our kids full time, like, you need to go home and be safe. You're not going to keep coming.
Yeah.
And I know some parents didn't do that, but for us, health is so important. I would never want to impede on her ability to stay safe, as well as for ours. So the weird thing is, in April, business picked up, and I know, I say this a lot, and it really came to fruition in April. I try to be so positive. I used to be more of someone that was very cynical about life, always kind of more negative than positive. And
Mhm.
since the onset of PTSD and my journey of survivorship, I've started to become more positive, which people probably be like, "How?" But it's just your perspective changes. So even though I lost business, even though I had to tell my colleagues, "Hey, I can't pay you because I don't have any business right now," or the one piece of business we still have, "Hey, you know what? Our salary's gonna have to be adjusted here." So I think that positivity and just saying, "Hey, you know what? how else can we get work? And the weird work came to me. Work came to Cielo. People reached out to me. Hey, you know what? I do want to do that project. Hey, you know, we do need help. We need PR. And it was really inspiring and amazing that that happened. And it was a sign that, okay, you know what? I'm supposed to have this business still. There are people out there that still need help. And so right now we're doing really well. And I think I I because the PTSD started out pretty early on when I launched Cielo Consulting, mental health has always been an important aspect of the intercommunications with my staff. So we kind of I groomed them in that way. Like, hey, we can talk about the fact that we've had a bad day and that you need to take a mental break. We can talk about the fact that you see a therapist once a week. So do I. You know, we would joke around like, maybe it's on Wednesday, this person's on Monday. You know, don't block. You know, block. She can't have calls, you know, Mondays at 3. So to be able to have that type of relationship with my colleagues, we were already virtual, so that wasn't a change. Really helped us, and support, it helped to support one another. And most of us are moms, right? So we're all going through it. You know, we would hear our kids in the background yelling and screaming, and just go, "Yeah, that's just what it is," you know. So yeah, so through it all, you know, it has been great, and I'm very lucky to be in this position because I have a lot of friends and peers and other people in the industry who are still struggling.
Okay. Well, I appreciate you sharing that. You know, there was a definitive scary time as a as a business owner, and like you said, as a business that does representation of other business that could have been at the time deemed non-essential, which is a new world to navigate in. And then at the time, like, it almost, I don't know, for me it almost felt like when it occurred, I was like, all right, we're gonna have this happen, we're gonna buckle down, and hopefully by into summer we'll see a different experience. And as we know, that is still a challenge at this time that we're going through. And it's interesting though that you kept strong while facing adversity, and you also actually were able to rely on your already existing relationship with the connection to your mental health that made you actually able to thrive in a sense, because you didn't get stuck in it. And there are uncertain things, there are certain obviously circumstances that are outside of people's control, as far as how COVID affected their work, their livelihood, layoffs, furloughs, and things like that. But finding the progression to go forward, and finding that voice to tell you that, hey, this needs to keep moving, and hey, it's okay to be realistic. It's okay to talk to clients or talk to staff and be like, this is it. This is where we're at, and it's out of the truth and purpose and intention that you share that and be able to adapt and adjust. And it's interesting that you doing that, then you saw a turn and saw more business coming in shortly thereafter.
Yeah. And the thing is with this industry, business always comes and goes. That's just how it is in the agency consulting world. Business always comes and goes. And so I think because I have started my business, would sit there and be like, okay, need some new clients. Where are they coming from? Like I've been going through that already for 5 years. And every time I would say, all right, so a project just ended, or, I need help. That was the other thing when the PTSD started. I was like, okay, you know what? I need to hire staff. I don't want to do this on my own, because it was just me in the beginning with CLO. And so I focused on getting bigger clients, more clients, so that I could bring on help. I mean, now I have a team of 5. And that process of trying to grow, trying to get more business and new business early on, and then trying to keep people staffed, I think just really trained me and trained my colleagues who are also entrepreneurs. And sometimes they have their own clients, and what's great now is, like, if they have their own client and that client's big enough, then we bring it together. And it's just an amazing relationship that we have, partnership that we have. So in some ways it was just like, well, this isn't anything really new per se of losing some business and trying to get new business. It's just now all of these other factors that kind of make it a little bit more chaotic, right? So when there were times before COVID that I needed to fill my business, the first thing I did was I'd write it down. I'd say, okay, I need two clients or one client. I'd love for it to be a restaurant, and I need to make this much money, and I would write it down. And I mean, I know this sounds really corny, but every time I wrote it down and focused on it, within that day, within the next couple of days, someone would call. I'd get an email. Hey, you know what? I know someone that needs PR. Or a former client would come back with something. And so it really goes back to what you put out there is what you get back.
Mhm.
And so, yeah, so I got to stay positive. Got to stay positive, folks. uh,
Absolutely. So it's something you're saying now, like they got to stay positive, but then also too you realize like when you turn from cynicism to a more positive mindset instead of being negative focused. I like to describe that as like going from like a static mind. Like I compare it, like I like using visuals and things that people remember. But like I compare like static mind. One of my pet peeves I hear people say is it is what it is, and I kind of compare that to like being Eeyore. Like you're just gonna sulk around and make it through the day, and everything is seen with a pessimism and impending doom kind of sensation. Oh, it is what it is. I might as well just not go forward and just stay here, or just kind of let ourselves down. But that's kind of where we got to take the jump towards a different direction and a different opportunity. If we're looking on the pathway of life, if we actually step back and observe it from a little further back than we were before, we won't be so focused on that one
mhm.
problem. And I call that problem magnification. So we just zoom in on it, and it's right there in our face, and we think that everything is scoped by that problem. I can barely see around it; it's right here in my face. But when we actually take pause and we step back, doing what you did, writing it down, narrative helps tremendously, because it when we do that, it takes it from that closed loop system, that tight knit system where we're just really, really super kind to ourselves. I'm being extremely sarcastic, and we beat ourselves up and we tell ourselves this isn't good enough, and it's going to happen, and we start worry, doubt, anxiousness, and then we step out of it and we have to write it. And when we write something down, we activate our communication, and so our communication is going to naturally be, especially in our writing, in a format that someone could pick it up and halfway hopefully understand what the hell we're talking about. So that narrative is a transition into speaking what you're experiencing or thinking, and it, very helpful to help guide you through instead of being that closed loop and just thinking about it and consuming yourself with it. It's a tremendous step in the right direction.
Mhm.
I think that's fantastic. But also, keying in on something you said about transitioning from, the sense of negative to positive, you know, from going to, static mind to being more adaptive. It's like Winnie the Pooh. Winnie the Pooh faced adversity. Winnie the Pooh just wants to get the honey, yet, he may not. And instead of going, oh crap, no, well, it just is what it is. I guess I'm not going to have honey. He goes and gets Piglet. There's him engaged in the community, like you said earlier, and he gets resourceful and he finds an adventure out of it. And it may be challenging, maybe stressful, but he's still going to get the honey. So I think that's a good little visual transition there to think about, and it's taking that forward and keep going. Because something I see as a person, as a therapist, is I have people come to me and they just get very sullen and beating themselves up and pushing judgment on themselves. Yet they're doing good things and they're doing the best they can. But instead of reflecting on, hey, this is the best I can do now, and what am I going to do now to get me to that point I want to go to, they get focused on, this is me and I'm running on empty, and I'm going to have to just go as far as I can. And if it ends, it ends. And so we need to find a way to, refuel the tank, get back into that sense of purpose, get back into being, maintained and operating efficiently and effectively. And I think that the simple shift is sometimes the most profound. But absolutely, positivity and positive thinking, it's so underrated because we live in a world where we're consumed with everything is accessible, and it's much more fun to watch a TikTok video of someone doing something quick and funny in a 10-second burst that could be, saying something audacious and silly or slapstick almost, and we'll be appeased by that. And yet, when it comes to the hard work of actually sitting down with our own thoughts and considerations, we will avoid that all
Yeah, it's true. It's true. We love to complain. We love to complain and be. My old agency used to call it the swamp. and you want to pull people in the swamp with you so that they sink with you. And if someone's constantly positive when you're being negative, you're either going to have to go along with it, or the person walks away because they're like, oh, that person's so happy. I don't want to be around them. So I'm like, fine, I don't want to be around you if you're always going to be negative. Don't walk on my parade. I want to have a good time and be happy. And look, I mean, there are opportunities to be sad as well and angry. And I mean, I went through like a whole host of emotions. I still do, but I think the difference is just acknowledging it. Like you said, like being aware, like, okay, I'm really angry right now and I'm yelling at my kids and I'm projecting onto them. And I don't like that. So let me take a pause and, figure out, what am I angry about? Because, when you have experienced trauma, especially childhood trauma, you just do such a good job of covering things up. And it's really scary. I'm like, wow, I had to really dig to, figure out that that's actually what's bothering me, which is why I still go to therapy. And because sometimes you don't allow yourself to do that digging until you just stop, right? And take that moment for yourself. The self-care is so important, right? And then, you spend that 50 minutes or whatever talking to someone and realize you start crying, all the emotions come out. You're like, oh yes, this is what's been wrong with me. I shouldn't say wrong, but this is what's been going on. This is why I'm having these challenges. And so yeah, even if you're someone who thinks that they can do this, ride out COVID and be a parent and work and figure all these things out without having any type of mental health support. I don't know how. I feel like anyone can really benefit from this, even if you don't have PTSD like I do. Right?
Well, yeah, I think that it's also just kind of going. Something you described earlier is, oftentimes when we put, descriptors together, people put stoic and brave together and they put them in the same, category. However, in this example in mental health, stoic versus brave is tremendously different. Stoic, standing still like a statue, taking on everything as it comes and not adjusting your course and just sticking to your story. So that all or nothing concrete thinking. And that, seems stoic into us in the moment. But brave is that ability to be scared out of your wit and uncertain and not knowing where to turn, but still trying to take an opportunity to address and face the fear, face the anxieties that are coming your way or have been carried with you for so long. And so I think that, that's a tremendous difference. You're being stoic or brave when we're talking about this.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. I like that. Stoic or brave.
Yep. Every once in a while I get a couple in there, every once in a while. So people have to deal with me talking about Winnie the Pooh and all kinds of other fantastic, weird stuff. So yeah, it's a fun time. So. Well, here we've been talking about mental health. Here's a question, and this is kind of a loaded question. There's no right or wrong answer, but I always like to hear from other people. In your opinion, does everyone need mental health treatment? Why? Why not?
Yeah, that's a good question. I would say just about anyone can benefit. Anyone can benefit from some type of mental health treatment. I find that a lot of people are in denial. And then when you start talking to them more, and I think once you're in therapy, you start to, or maybe it's just me because I actually like psychology, you start to understand how to ask certain questions and how to read people. And so it's funny, I find that sometimes the people who are the most adamant about not going to therapy are the main ones that need it. I would never say, unless it's like a close friend of mine or relative, I would never say that to somebody. But that aside, I know people who have said, you know what, I have had issues with my mom, and I just feel like I need to see a therapist to kind of unpack it a little bit more. And maybe that person only went like a couple of times, right? And then they were like, you know what, I
Yeah.
had a couple sessions and I feel much better and I'm good. So I think, that's why I say anyone can benefit from it. And you don't have to have like a traumatic experience to say that you need it. I mean, look, in the beginning for me, I just knew I had anxiety and I wanted to understand why. And I had no shame about it. No one in my family really supported me in the beginning to go to therapy because, especially in the Black community, it's changed. But traditionally speaking, you just don't talk about mental health. And I'm happy that the tides are changing and that it is becoming more of a topic. But with that said, there was no one who was really cheerleading me on for that, other than the fact that my best friends, especially the ones I went to college with, were like, oh, yeah, of course, why not? Because some of us had gone to therapy in college after having like bad breakups with boyfriends and things like that. There was a free counselor that we had access to. So anyway, I would say if there's something that you're grappling with, whether it's a relationship with your husband or a relationship with your relative or work issues. I mean, I think right now, especially because of COVID, everyone could benefit from at least one or two sessions with a trained professional, because these are people who might not, who are in situations that they're not used to being in. Like for me, I'm used to feeling like I'm trapped. I felt like I was mentally trapped, for a long time, and it was therapy that really helped me. So
Okay.
I already have a lot of those coping skills and those tools that I've been using for the past 3 years, that somebody else in the situation that's on lockdown, that can't see people, or trying to balance the kids and everything, they just don't have those tools. And so of course there's a lot of literature out there that people can read, but there's nothing like
Yeah.
staring at somebody whose full attention is on you and asking you probing questions that really make you think and analyze what's going on. That's really valuable.
So I think about like this is an example from what you just described. Is if we look on life as we're the nomad on the healing journey, on a journey across country by foot, you're going to need a place to rest, and you're going to need a place to recuperate, and you're also going to need a place to pull out the damn map and see where the waypoints truly are. Because sometimes we're lost and we don't even know it, or we tell ourselves, "I got this. The sun's to the west of me. I must be going north," and in fact, you're going south. So maybe on this journey, those little places you stop where you're telling people that along the way they could have help or assistance, that's their place to recuperate and revive and recharge and make sure that they chart the course in the direction that they truly want to go.
Absolutely, 100%. And I think the more people who realize that, the better off we'll be when it comes to the how to carry on right now, because this is a new normal,
Okay.
and it's the tools and the coping mechanisms that you used before,
Okay.
you might not have access to now, right? So how are you going to navigate that?
I like it. So I think there's some sound advice tied in there as well. So as always, you give double bonus on your answer. So thank you very much for that. As we kind of wrap up here, I want to first off, of course, say I appreciate you greatly. You've done great things for many people, including myself, with continuing the relationship and helping people, get awareness about me, myself, my practice, my background, and that's always helpful. And I think that's something too that goes to the community as a professional, is how we can connect with others that may not even be in our profession or in our quote unquote industry, yet we can benefit from that connection and that authenticity that we bring to them and they bring to us. Something that I kind of think about too is with this real conversation and getting to hear about you and your work as a professional, and also hear about your growth as a personal and how those have blended together and done well. And you brought up mental health, something you said a second ago I think is super important. If you don't mind sharing more info on, is you identified that cultural experience, being Black female, addressing mental health. What do you mean by that? Where were some of the challenges you faced more specifically related to that?
Thank you. It's interesting how COVID, the Black Lives Matter movement, and just digging in a bit deeper into family history and family trauma has influenced some of my writing and content. So for those, should mention nubiaduvall.com. That's where I blog and feature thoughtful experts on mental health and everyday people as well. Jeremy's on there. So, I've been trying to unpack the fact that historically for myself, racism has been traumatic for me, and I didn't realize it. And I'm trying to understand and looking back to uncover, a lot of baggage. And there's something called the epigenetics of trauma that I came across about how trauma can be in your DNA for generations. So I was like, well, this is still to be 100% proven. They've had some tests on it. New York Times did an interesting article about it with related to the Holocaust and veterans who went into war. But I was like, my eyebrow raised because I was like, ooh, so let me think about this. Like, African Americans, Blacks in America, their ancestors who were here as slaves experienced a hell of a lot of trauma, right? Physical, emotional, mental, and now look at where we are now and all the trials and tribulations and how that affects your family life, how that affects how you communicate with one another, how that affects how your opinion of yourself, your self-worth. All of these things are starting to kind of come together in a different way for me. And so mental health is something that in my family, the conversation was always quiet. Like, for example, we would have a family member that was a schizophrenic, and it was kind of just like not really explained to me as a child what that meant, and that he's going to get help, which he really didn't get the help he needed. I think it was because we all kind of just wanted to pretend it would just go away. Like, that's not going away. And when I told my parents that I wanted to see a therapist before I knew anything about my trauma, just for the anxiety, they were just like, well, why? We don't understand. Instead of being like, well, yeah, good for you, figure it out. And now that I've educated my parents a bit more, and they see the change in me, they get it, but it was surprising that it wasn't supported in the beginning. But then I look at it, I'm like, well, no, that kind of makes sense because of just past things. And just to give a quick example of of what I mean when I say things were traumatic for me, my parents and I were on a road trip, and I had buried this memory until a couple of weeks ago, talking about it in therapy. And parents on a road trip. I live in New Jersey. We grew up in Maryland, so we were going north. From what I recall, and towards New Jersey, and we needed to eat. And for whatever reason, wherever we were, there was only really a Denny's around. And this is in the late 80s, early 90s, when Denny's was like, you don't go to Denny's because if you don't go if you're Black, because they're not going to serve you. So I remember having this fear, like, are we going to get fed? And of course, we go inside. They didn't want to seat us. They didn't want to seat us. They didn't want to give us a menu. My father walked with Malcolm X, was part of the Black Power movement in the 60s. So he wasn't having that. He gets up and yelling and screaming, and we deserve to be fed, and da-da-da-da. And I had so much shame, and that moment of shame brought me back to the moment of shame I had when I was abused when I was younger. And I cried when I told this story to my therapist, because I was like, that's the problem. I don't like that shame. And racism, there's a lot of shame involved in experiencing racism. So, it's a really complicated topic and one that I'm continuing to just investigate and understand and talk about and write about, because now's the time to really unpack it more, and for non-Blacks to understand it. And I find that when I talk about the intergenerational trauma, people, it flips a switch, because it's not a Black problem. It becomes an everyone problem. if you're Jewish, you're like, oh yeah, well, the Holocaust, I get that. If your parent was in the military, okay, oh yeah. So it, in many ways, it kind of breaks down the barriers of this just being a Black person problem or a minority person problem. It becomes an everybody problem, right? Which goes back to what we said before, that anyone can benefit from some therapy.
Okay. Well, first off, holy goodness, wow, that
I know.
was a really
Sorry.
amazing. No, you're. I love it because it's true and it's real and it's an example from your life and your experience. And then you brought up like that moment when Dad stood up and he demanded to be served and seen as a human like everybody else
Yeah.
in the place and as you should deserve. That childhood experience was embarrassment and shame in the moment of frustration and anger and Dad actually addressing something. But now we come forward and we see it from a different lens and we understand that there was an injustice, there was an unfairness. And I think talking about it, some people get really clammed up. And I am a white male and I am a therapist and I am very open about things, and I love talking to people and giving them the opportunity to feel more real and trusted and understood. And I think for me as a therapist, I always try to be more understanding of who I'm working with. So having these conversations for me, I think is more natural than others. As as a non-Black, to be able to speak to people because I will probe and ask questions in a genuine way and try to build an understanding. But I think the conversation is absolutely worth having. And, those that are watching or listening to this and you've got questions or concerns and you're not sure how to ask them, actually do some research, do some reading, do some, actual old school stuff like we used to do in school before the power of the internet and say, hey, Google, and then something shows up as a result. Do some reading on your own, get invested in taking a stance against your own thoughts and your own biases, because sometimes that's inherent. And, I grew up in Texas. I love Texas. We're all yeehaw and howdy and, our barbecue's the best and all that crowd, everything's bigger stuff we talk about. But Texas has a storied past. It has a story of triumph and it also has a story that is hard to swallow and identify with. And, that's something that we look at history and we see the realities of it. We don't just put it towards one group, one person, one positional power to be the narrative that we should see it. We actually look at every single piece of the puzzle and we see all the intricacies and the intersectionality of it. I think that's extremely powerful in taking your journey in mental health, because if we just talk about you and as we just identify the self, we're like, oh, well, let's make you happy. What makes you happy? Oh, let's cope with this. Let's cope with that. But we don't talk about, oh, by the way, hey, we have a concern that has shaped some of your experience, and from the cultural perspective and biases against seeking support in mental health, then also from the perspective of what you're exposed to on the outside, that definitely can affect you. And racism is absolutely a valid concern in our current time to be addressed and have an effect on people.
Very well said. Very well said. Yeah, I think that's an important aspect of your role as a therapist, is to try to understand all of the outside influences and forces that make that person who they are. We're so complicated, and sometimes we don't want to. Sometimes we don't want to dig deeper. And I, for one, have been there. I'm like, I don't want to know. I don't want to go any further. I don't want to peel that away. But every time something else gets peeled away, I feel freer. It's like, oh yeah, well, now that's starting to make more sense, and I understand myself. And so, yeah, it's a liberating experience, and I'm happy that I am continuing that journey. And hopefully, you and I are both helping people along the way, right? So that's really important to me too, is that I can share what I learn along this process, and maybe it'll touch someone and then get them. It's like a domino effect, right?
Absolutely. And that, and some of us out in the world, we identify as, in therapy world, we call as being an empath. And so we they literally absorb the emotions of others and take them on as our own. And so sometimes if you have empathic tendencies as well as a need for control, we often find ourselves feeling out of control because we can't fix other people for them. We have to fix ourselves first. If you're worried only about others and yourself is always last, it's really hard to get to be at the finish line first. It's not a selfish act, it's a selfless act to be able to be self-aware and address your own needs in an effective manner so that those around you and those supported by you are going to get you at your most best version of self versus the sense of, hey, I'm good. People ask that question, how are you doing? I'll when it's therapist, I'll ask them the really simple loaded question, how are you doing today? And people say, oh, I'm good. And I'll just sit there and and silence is sometimes your best friend. Here's a secret skill we do as therapists. Silence is like something I had to learn to practice as a therapist because I talk a lot, but I will sit there and go, oh, and all of a sudden, oh, I'm good turns into, well, actually, this happened last week. Or, oh, this example. Or, oh, well, this happened, blah, blah, blah. And so then all of a sudden we really start to see, oh, wait a second, I'm not really addressing what I need to. And I'm telling myself something different than what is absolutely true. And me not addressing my needs and concerns, proactively is pulling me from the success that I'm demanding I deserve to see.
Yep. All to that. That's awesome. Great. That's true.
Well, as we kind of wrap up, what are the takeaways? What are the most important things for people to remember about you?
Good question. Have a blog, nubiaduvall.com. I create a lot of content on there. Same on Instagram. I'm a little bit behind with some of my Instagram TV videos because things have been so busy, but I try to do videos once a week, every 2 weeks, just on what I'm learning through the process of healing. And books that I'm reading, things like that. They're pretty quick videos as well.
Nice.
And, I just want people to know that I'm creating content for you. I mean, it definitely helps me heal, but I'm doing this for the community. I'm doing it for the community of survivors of trauma, survivors of abuse, because many of them are in the shadows. They have a lot of shame about what happened to them, whether it was as a child or an adult, and they just don't want to talk about it, and they don't even know, who to talk to if they wanted to, because there's so much shame. So yeah, it's that main core audience. And then sometimes I create content for the periphery audience, for the husbands, the wives, the boyfriends, girlfriends, say, hey, you know what? Here's what's going on in their head right now when it comes to, maybe not wanting to kiss you today. And here's probably why, So that's my mission. And, follow me on Instagram, Encounters with Nubia. You can follow me on Facebook, Encounters with Nubia. And that's basically it, I guess. So maybe one day you'll see a TV show or movie out written by me. I'm in the process of pitching a TV pilot based on my novella. I'm learning how to write movie scripts. So who knows? Maybe there'll be a Nubia Duvall production company one day. That'll be the last hat I add on. And I think that's probably it.
Awesome. Well, hey, thank you so much again for taking time to do this. And thank you so much sincerely for how you conduct yourself in the world as a person who is addressing some of the hardships that we face. And instead of avoiding them or being overcome by them, you're trying to chip away at them one step at a time. And, something you mentioned is about, the sense of parent and the sense of spouse and the sense of, business owner. I think that, you being able to find a way to successfully navigate those roles, even though at times it may not feel successful, and finding that momentum to drive forward is absolutely a powerful narrative to you addressing your trauma, your needs, and your life's journey to make it the best that you can be.
Thank you. That really means a lot to me to hear you say that. And thank you for having me on. I appreciate it.